So today we're joined by Nick Miller, who's a virtual CISO, and Geoff Bird, who is the Information Security Officer of the National Bank of Kuwait. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for your presentations. Thank you for your interviews. I have lots of questions for you, especially for you both. You both operate in that CISO level. So you have a very good understanding and knowledge from a holistic point of view from businesses. Now, within the cyber industry at this moment in time, there's a lot of, how do I put this? I don't want to say negativity, but what we should be doing. You know, we should be doing this, we should be doing that. But what I wanted to ask was, what do you think has been an achievement this year in the cybersecurity industry? Do you think there's been any good achievements this year?
Oh, thank you. I'm going to be contentious on the mic. I don't think much has changed. The only difference I see is adding the word cyber has pricked up the ears of the boards, which is great. And there is an opportunity for us to gain buy-in. I welcome every news article that references a breach. I'm very sorry for the people who've been affected. Having been in one of the companies when it was happening, I understand how unpleasant it is. But for the whole planet, if it's raising awareness that we need to be doing sensible things, that's a good thing. Here we are. Contentious moment over.
I think we're heading in the right direction, just slowly. I think if we are, the steps that we're making are in the right sort of direction. So with the guidance that started to come out now from the UK government has seen a polar shift in the way that it used to be. It used to be a very technical authority called CSG issuing 200-page specification manuals that no one ever read. And what you're now seeing is much more engagement, attempts at engaging businesses to say, look, actually, here's some stuff that you can do. Here's some good advice. And it ranges across the spectrum. It goes from, a high level for a board through to they've actually issued some really good hardening advice for Windows. Right? So if you're now an IT provider and you don't know what you should be doing to secure Windows 10 out of the box, they've issued a guide that says, here you go, here's a standard. And actually, if you want to download the thing at the bottom, you can just implement it straight away. So I think stuff like that helps. I think GDPR helps to a point because it gets people thinking, okay, what do I need to do? How best do I what actually maybe are my responsibilities? It's permeating. It's just taking time.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. So just kind of touching on what you just said, there are a lot of companies out there who feel that they are not, they won't be affected by cyber threats or cyber attacks, okay? So in a situation where a company has decided that cyber is a risk, what would be the first thing that you would recommend them to do?
I think I would probably want them to think about, I think the first thing is to think about actually what is it that they're looking to achieve, right? So if you're sitting there going, as a business, we don't know if we're doing enough on security, we are worried about a cyber breach, you need to have at least some semblance of a strategy and a plan.
So what I mean by that is, what would you tell them as a strategy? If they,
okay.
Yeah. So what would you say the first thing that you need to do when becoming cyber compliant? This is what you should do first.
So I go with first is sort of two tracks. One is you need to think about your business from the perspective of the threats. So what is it that people are going to attack you for? Are they attacking you because you're on a target list of 10,000 other people, in which case they don't really care about you? Or are they targeting you for a reason? So if you're just a regular small business, there's probably no reason that you're being specifically targeted, but that doesn't mean you don't have, there's still a threat there. It's a different type of threat. If you're a national bank of a very reasonably well-off country, you've got different types of threats. So I think understanding that tells you for a start, it's essentially like how high do you need to build your wall? How detailed do you need to go? And then it's understand, okay, understand the universe of where is your threats going to come from. So you want to look at things like understand your IT to a basic level. How do people access your systems? How do people, have you got people working from home? Have you got people coming in remotely? Is everyone based in an office? Because then you can start to say, well, here are standards that you can apply to your IT. So there are some basic kind of guides, some basic hardening instructions, but you kind of need to first understand the landscape. Because one of the things I think people commonly make the mistake of is to go down accreditation routes, something like ISO. And the big bugbear that I have against ISO accreditation in particular is that it lets you draw the scope of what you want to be secure to some extent. You decide on what's going to be included in your certification, right? So what you see a lot of businesses do is they say, our sensitive data is on this system, so this system we will make secure. And they focus straight in on where they think the problem is, leaving everything else out. I think you have to start with, my chair slightly rotate back. You have to start with, where's our big picture? And then we'll start to bring them in. So I think that the first thing is, how big of a target are we? And the second is, what are we actually trying to protect? What's our landscape? And then you can start to say, well, okay, here are some practical steps you can take over here. Here's some practical steps you can take over here. And you can start to then prioritize. But you have to have that understanding of those two fundamental things first.
Fair enough. What about yourself, Geoff? What do you think?
Yes.
So what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, gap analysis. I mean, exactly that. Understand what's going to bust your doors down and grab all the goodies, and then make sure your doors are good. Gap analysis against best practices. The NCSC, top 10, fantastic. The Australian one, that I'm going to look at the 8 because I remembered when it was a much larger set. Fantastic things to look and say, yeah, these are sensible steps. Are we doing this? How far away are we? And then it's pick it and do it properly.
So it's putting a structure in plan.
Yes.
A structure in place to discover your plan.
Yes.
That's
and don't try and rush everything all at once before you've understood what actually you can do.
Because a lot of companies, a lot of small, medium companies, their first thought is, I'm going to spend loads of money and I'm going to chuck loads of money at cybersecurity and hopefully we won't get attacked. But in your eyes, you're saying, come up with a formula, come up with a plan.
I'd say don't spend money. The first thing is don't spend money. The first thing, actually, I think it's something, again, Nick mentioned, wait until you understand what you need to spend money on. Don't just rush out and buy an enormous CM. That won't help you in any way, shape or form. Understand what you need to do.
So I'm going to kind of pivot these questions onto something different. Do you think people in organizations take cybersecurity seriously?
Once they've had a breach, yes. Before that, no. And I think there's good reason for that. One is it's not real until it's happened to you. Look at how, for example, in the same way of trying to get people to, think about, I remember, I was quite young, but I remember there was a big push back in the 80s and 90s for people to do stuff like lock their cars, because people were just leaving their car doors open and leaving people were stealing stereos and stuff out of the cars because either the doors weren't locked or people just smashed through the windows. And it was an awareness thing of you need to get people to stop leaving this stuff on display, but the best way of doing that was once it happened to them, they stopped doing it. But you didn't want everyone to have to become a victim before those behaviors got a bit ingrained. I think we're in a similar place. There's a lot of good advice, but people just don't think it's going to apply to them until it does, and then they take it seriously. That's one place where regulation helps. It says, well, look, I don't care if you think you're a target or not. Actually, we have decided that to a base level, everyone is a target, and so you have to at least do something, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think the awareness, and you're right. When it happens, it's real. Until then, it's something that happened to your neighbour, and you can go, "Oh, we were lucky. Well, we wouldn't have suffered that because we do X, Y, and Z." Yeah, it probably isn't the case. It may just be fortune that someone happened to target someone else. Awareness. It can happen to anyone at any time, and you will not stop things happening. You can reduce the likelihood of things happening, and when they do happen, you can have a plan for how to recover. If you think you're impenetrable, you're not. But if you've got a plan to get back on your feet, if someone sucker punched you to the floor, then that's a better place to be.
So the awareness is really the main factor when it comes down to protecting yourself within an organisation. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, but awareness at a senior level, executive level. I think the focus at the moment in the industry seems to be on staff training, and yes, that's important, but actually, do the people running your business fully appreciate the potential impact that some of these attacks can have? And again, I think the issue then is that when they happen, they're then written off as unavoidable, and it's a case of trying to distinguish between what was unavoidable and what was actually avoidable. Like, I think one of the things you said is very right. It's about it's not just it's reducing the likelihood and reducing the impact. Like, they're the things that you do in cyber. You make it harder to happen, and you make it, if it does happen, it hurts you less. Okay. If you've done nothing, you're likely to not just suffer an attack, but an incredibly disruptive attack.
Okay. What about yourself, Geoff? Same kind of idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as CISOs that you guys are, what advice would you give to fellow CISOs? As they all have different strengths, right? But what advice would you give to fellow CISOs around your experience that you've had?
The CISOs I've met have been fantastically clever people. The best ones understand the business. And actually, I'm more likely to ask advice than give it out.
So when you say they understand the business, is it from a technical point or from a
360?
The full
360.
business?
What's the purpose of the business? What do the shareholders want the business to do? Because that's a level that's often not really seen. And actually the shareholders it's the public. We're back to the public awareness again. Yeah. The technical CISOs, fantastic. Non-technical business function CISOs, fantastic. It's a very difficult position. Understanding the information that's important and protecting the information we care about is a very difficult task. I actually wouldn't give advice. My only thing is make sure you really do understand the business, not just the parts of the business with the flashing lights and the tin. It's what's the purpose of the business.
Yeah, I think if there's two things I'd say, one is don't be afraid to ask for help. As a remit, you have to both fully understand the business, what it's doing, how technology integrates with it, and is your strategy appropriate for minimizing those risks? That's an incredibly hard challenge. You are going to need other people's help. Don't pretend to know everything. And I think the second thing is be honest. You are doing no one any favors if you just gloss over the problems that your organization faces. If you minimize those risks when speaking upwards, like if you are a yes man, if you are just sitting there to say everything's fine, don't worry, or we've risk accepted this or whatever, you're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. You need to fundamentally say, are there problems that we need to fix? How much of a risk are these? And be taken seriously. So you can't be Chicken Little, but you have to be honest.
There are some very uncomfortable conversations that have to be had.
Because there's a lot of talk around CISOs having to be in uncomfortable situations, like you said. Do you think the role of a CISO is changing moving forward? Is it becoming more of a role where the board is now looking at the CISO saying, you are protecting our full business organization rather than just our IT organization? Are you seeing that trend?
Well, I think the board are responsible for protecting their business.
Okay.
They appoint a chief information security officer as a specialism, but it's the board. It's their responsibility. They're accountable. It's not something that you chuck on someone with a C hat on who looks almost as though he sits next to IT. It's the board. It's a business function, and that's where the great thing is that role is at a board level. Whereas I'm aware that in some less mature companies that may be dropped down the ranking. It's a board thing. It's board accountability.
Yeah, I think the biggest question that you have to answer as a CISO is, are we meeting the risk level as it's been laid out by the business? That's the fundamental question. It's not on you to decide what that risk level is. The business, and that should come down from the board or the chief executive, they pick what level of risk they are comfortable taking. You advise as the CISO, with the resources and the strategy and the technologies, etc. in place, are we meeting those risk levels? Are we breaching them? Are we below them? And advise on how that may change. And in some cases, you have to go to battle with the rest of the business. And it's, the big push for me is why security should be distinct from technology is you might have a CTO that's allowed legacy technology to build up in the business. And there needs to be a challenge on that, which is, if you only look at it through a cost perspective, yes, the cost of doing a technology replacement project may be huge, and it's only gotten bigger because it's been left so long. But actually, it has become a black hole at the center of your organization that is just ready to consume everything. And in terms of you cannot, it's such a high risk that it needs to be a counteracting balance. Like, CTO comes along and says, here's all the reasons that we can't replace that this year, here's all the reasons it needs to be delayed. As someone sitting above them, a chief executive or board, there needs to be a counteracting view that says, but until we replace that, we run the following risks. Here is what would happen if the wrong person clicks on the wrong thing. This is the potential impact. There needs to be a challenge to what is seen as, sometimes the status quo in the business.
Okay, perfect. So this is the last question that I wanted to ask, and it's a bit of a. I don't know how you'll feel about this question. Okay, but I'm going to ask you anyway. CISOs are often, or when an attack happens, CISOs are often the ones that are blamed. Okay, they're the ones that should have protected the organization. Now, many CISOs have the opinion that the board didn't give us the budget. We presented our case to them and then they said no, and now they're using us as a scapegoat. You as CISOs, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's a fair way to assess a hack by firing the top level person that's in charge of information security, or do you think it should be seen as a company should give time to a CISO rather than just firing them because there's a big media outrage?
Mixed. So there are times when I have seen boards whose capability is very low, and you could present them a very clear, here is the risk to your business, here are different strategies that cost different amounts of money, and one of the options is do nothing and carry all of the risk, and they'll just accept that. And at which point, what are you to do as the CISO? You have said, here is a risk, here are many different strategies for solving it. It's not we have to spend all this money and have this kill the business or nothing. It's, you've presented a range of options and they've still opted to do nothing. You can, at that point, can wash your hands of absolve yourself of any responsibility. That, sadly, is also still too rare. I think too often I have seen and spoken to CISOs whose security strategies are tied into vendors. And they are going to the board to ask money to buy a box. And what they're not saying is, we need to reduce the risk of a cyber attack, or we need to reduce the impact of a breach by handling privileged access better. It's, we need to put in CyberArk. And there is no alternative. It's CyberArk or nothing. It's not, one company that I was working with, they had domain admins. They had 3 or 4 domain admins across their entire net. So these are the people who are privileged to modify any computer in the entire environment. And they were using those accounts to check their email and browse the web. So if they opened the wrong attachment, that malware instantly has domain admin privileges. Right? That is Cyber 101, how to fix that. Have 2 accounts. Check your email with account A, be domain admin with account B. Solved. They had done nothing because they'd put in a request for CyberArk, which had been denied because it was a £250,000 program. So they'd done nothing. They're not your only 2 options. You've got other options. It isn't spend all this money and go through all this disruption or do nothing. So I think where you've seen a CISO actually try to break the problem down, present opportunities, present strategies, and it's the board who have just not been able to take that concept on board, that's with them. But I think we're not at the point yet where all the CISOs are doing that, so it's also not fair to push back and say it's not a CISO's fault if that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, our remit is to protect the information within our business. Some of that is evangelizing best practice. Some of it is education. A lot of it's education. And it's not education to the staff members. It's education to the board. And you're absolutely right that Nick's. I disagree with none of it. My thoughts on it are, if you have a board who are accountable, and if, as the information security lead, you have explained the risk in a straightforward way, without veering into the technologies, which is going to roll the eyes of the best of people. I mean, I get it myself. I'll roll my eyes if it gets too geeky for me, and I love geekery. It's, have you explained the position? Can sensible people understand? If those sensible people then decide not to do something, explicitly forbidding something to happen, and the consequence occurs, well, that's with them. If you haven't explained it very well, and the board didn't really understand, but they just thought everything was okay, and something happens, they'll be surprised, and then their surprise will turn to anger, and the anger will point to the one who was the messenger, effectively. So at that point, were it to be me, God forbid it is, were it to be me, I would expect to get the wrath because I hadn't educated and explained the risks to the business, because it's running a business and it's risk. It's a straightforward thing that can become incredibly complicated.
Interesting, very, very interesting. Well, I'd like to say thank you very much, guys, for that. That was very, very interesting to see the insights into CISO's mind. That's what it is. So, information security. Sorry, yeah. I keep saying that. Well, thank you very much, guys. And the talks and everything will be on cybertalks.co.uk. So, thank you very much. Thank you.